All right, everybody ready to roll?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, here we go. So at NWEF, No Webster Educational Foundation, we believe that faith and morality are both central and essential to human flourishing and to the formation of character. So this evening, as we discuss the role of faith and morality in education, I'd like us to consider several things. And this is going to kind of unroll through the evening, but I'm just kind of setting the dinner plate here tonight, okay? Whose primary responsibility is it to determine what our children learn about faith and morality and the whole concept of character development? Whose responsibility is that? Should schools and the government play a role? And what impact do faith and morality have on individuals and on society, both short-term and long-term? So those kind of the big parameters that we want to delve into. But let's start out with a group of some specific questions. First of all, I'm going to throw three of them out just back to back, and then we're going to talk about those for a second. What is the difference and relationship between faith and morality? The difference and relationship between faith and morality. How can a moral standard be taught without agreement on the authority giving the standard? And what influence do faith and morality have on character development? Okay, let's talk. Who wants to start us off? So we got three questions there, so we can touch on them. You
Dr.
can hit them all together.
Well, I'll go ahead and take a stab at it.
Okay.
The first one you talked about, it's a difference between faith and morality.
Yeah.
And I would say faith is your belief in something, and morality is the way you live it out. So.
Yep. Anybody add?
Absolutely. Obviously, as a pastor, I don't think these are separate issues. I think one is just a natural occurrence of another. And the Bible says faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. And so, absolutely, I agree. I don't think they should be separated. I think they come together, married concepts.
They are definitely married concepts, but I would concur that one is kind of the belief system, the other is kind of how that gets lived out and becomes practical, right? Mm-hmm. Do we all agree on that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Should schools and government play a role?
I would say they have to. And we're not in the dark with this. We have a lot of documents out there, fundamental documents. We have the Establishment Clause, Free Exercise Clause, Religious Freedom Restoration Act, Equal Access Act, and then we have, of course, the Memorandum on Religious Expression in Public Schools. We have a lot to go on that mandate, standards of learning in Virginia mandate world religions being taught. So I think absolutely this is crucial.
Okay.
When you look at the Declaration of Independence, for example, it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights.
Right.
So I think they presumed in the Declaration of Independence that, of course, we're going to have to teach some values because certain things are self-evident.
Yes.
They're obvious, they're irrefutable. I mean, there's certain laws we have, for example, in our society that people don't even argue about it because it's so obvious, but they're starting to argue today.
Correct.
But you know, sensible people don't even argue about certain laws, and it's because they are self-evident. I mean, we all get convicted or feel guilty about certain things, and that's because of the way we're made by our Creator. So it's inevitable that it's going to be taught one way or the other, either explicitly or implicitly. And that's obviously what happens in schools, is they may try to deny that they're teaching values, but they certainly are. Now, whether I trust them to teach it, that's another matter.
and that's not the minority-held mindset that we are created in the image and the likeness of God. 90%, according to a 2018 Gallup poll, 90% of Americans believe in God. Mm-hmm. We are not the minority in thinking that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's true.
Brent, I'm going to pull you out of the darkness here. Any thoughts?
Well, I think there's an expectation of behavior inside of a school, so we definitely have to have some sort of standard. And where does that standard come from?
Okay. Well said. All right. So then how about this one? What impact do faith and morality have on individuals? Wait a second. Am I on the right question? No, that's coming up. So what influence do faith and morality have on character development? What influence do faith and morality have on character development?
I think Brent, I'll springboard off of him, use that as a segue. I think, and this might sound trite, trying to be catchy, but if there's no standard, there's no standard. That whole thing, if you don't stand for something, you fall for anything. And I think that's our current environment in the school system right now. We have deviated back from 1962-64, we have deviated away from that standard. And I think without a standard, it's situational ethics. I mean, whatever is right and pleasing in our own eyes, and it's fluid. But I think we have failed our students by embracing that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think we're going to dig into that a little bit deeper later. So we'll go ahead to the next. Here's a statement that came in, a comment actually through Facebook. Paul sent this in. Religion and faith does not equal morality. Morality can be taught in public schools without religion. Keep religion in the church and in the home. Keep religion out of public schools. What are your thoughts on his statement?
Well, I've heard similar arguments before. Sometimes people will say you can't legislate morality.
Yeah.
I've heard that. But the thing is, all the laws we have are based on morality. Yes. When we say, you can't murder people, murder, that's from the Ten Commandments. so much of our laws are completely based on morality. And so the idea that we can divorce morality and law are absurd. And it may sound good in theory for people who don't like morality, but in reality it doesn't play out well. I mean, if you look at parts of our country which are more lawless, I don't think you want to live there right now. I think of certain places like Portland that are just chaotic. And I've met some people recently who are from there, and they are just having a hard time right now. Mm-hmm. So your belief systems most definitely impact your daily life, and they impact the people around you, because no man is an island entire of himself. We're all part of the main, to get.
Yeah. So there are kind of three elements of his thesis here. Okay, mm-hmm. Faith and religion don't equate to morality. Not sure. You can have faith, you can be religious and not be moral. So I think we could agree with that, right? We could agree with that. Morality can be taught in public schools without religion, and maybe what I'm just trying to understand the question. Maybe what he's saying is that morality can be taught without teaching religion as the basis. And I say that because of what he says later. And then he says, keep religion in the church and the home, and keep religion out of public schools. So what he's trying to do, maybe, he's not here. I'm just playing devil's advocate from the conversation. What I may be hearing him say, and he's welcome to text in or call in with additional comment if he wants to. But I think, what I'm hearing him say is he thinks that the home and the church are the place where religion ought to be promoted and taught, and not in the public school. And we probably, to a great extent, would agree with that. We're going to dig into that a little bit more. So
it sounds to me like he's concerned about the imposition of values on people. Yes. And that's what I often hear is don't impose your values on me.
Yeah.
But the problem is, there's consequences to every belief system. Mm-hmm. And in parts of the country where certain belief systems are more prevalent, there's an impact on society. So, for example, I grew up in New York, but I've been living in the South for the last 30 years. The South has a higher percentage of Christians than where I grew up in New York. And that was reflected in society. There was a much more crass, blunt, rude tone or quality to the entire society that I grew up in as compared to where I live right now.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate the gentleman's concern about imposition of morality, but at the same time, the lack of it creates some side effects as well.
And furthermore, I think that if you were to just go back in our history as Americans 60 years, that could be a very valid point. But our country is older than 60 years. When you look at the first laws created that dealt with education, they were done in the 1640s in Massachusetts. Mr. Mann, Mr. Webster. When you look at American history, the very fabric of our country and the documents, the founding fathers, the fabric of our country, the fabric of the educational system in our country, you cannot cut and paste religion out. It's who we are. It's how we got where we are.
Yeah.
So you would be doing every student a disservice by separating and compartmentalizing religion from education. In fact, again, standards of learning in Virginia require religion being taught. So you can't do that. I think every educator would agree that it's crucial to the success and achievement of every student to teach to the whole child. And to teach history.
Absolutely. You want to add something?
Sure. Well, I think you look at the letter from the Dansbury Baptist to Thomas Jefferson, the president, and then the letter back, wanting to have one religion as the official religion of the United States. Well, that goes against what the whole entire, our rights and why we originally came here.
Yeah.
So I think that you can't single out one sector of religion like Catholics or any other religion like that.
Right. So I think if we can kind of wrap up here for just a little bit, maybe a little open-ended, but I think the basic thing is this. Religion touches us all. Faith. I prefer to use the word faith over religion because language has changed so much that, it kind of almost means different things, right? But because faith really, what do I believe, right? Religion is often in today's culture looked at as just a whole series of to-dos and don'ts and who you belong to. Whereas, core belief system, what do I believe? Everybody has a belief system. Even if they say, I don't believe in God, there's something they believe in, right? So that's a belief system. In a sense, that establishes the foundation of their faith. Religion, faith, it affects all of our society. You can't get around it. And in all reality, since it also impacts us personally, that whole element cannot be ignored because that has to be addressed. It has to be understood, as like the video said. We got to get people looking with open minds to understand the concepts of faith and grapple with that, because without grappling deeply there, they really are not fully informed, not only for themselves, but about life and society as a whole. Okay?
Absolutely. And if I could just say, even from a business perspective, again, we're doing students a disservice and not teaching religion and culture. They get into the business world and they're dealing with the diversity of, and something that's very fundamental and important to 90+% of our population. If we exclude that from our schools, we're setting our kids up for failure, even from a business perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say, too, faith creates civility in society.
Yeah.
Because I mentioned in the beginning, I was a school counselor for a while, and I believe, Brent, you worked security in the school for a while. And I know, kids are going to have conflict at school, and some of them are really hormonal, depending on their age, and things like that. And so, when they are competing against each other and things like that, it leads to conflict. And faith is a factor in most kids' lives that help them to relate in a more civil, polite way to other people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Let's go to the next here. So here's a question. Do faith and morality play an important role in human development and in community health? You kind of started, you almost did a transition there, okay, the whole civility thing. Anybody want to dig into that just a little deeper?
You know, historically, before the 1960s, we saw a different cultural response to conflict management, conflict resolution than we do now. And I think the big clicker was in 62 and then 64 and then 73. These were big marks where we were deviating away from faith, separating that religion aspect, faith and morality. And I think you start to see the results of that.
There is a lot of research to back up the idea that faith has very much positive impacts on society. When you look, for example, at the Big Brother, Big Sister program, they have all kinds of longitudinal research showing that kids who have a Big Brother, Big Sister have lower rates of substance abuse, lower rates of incarceration, all kinds of lower rates of depression. And so, you know, that's obviously motivated by a lot of faith with a lot of the participants.
All right, so here's one that, let's see where this one goes. Do you agree that it is not the role of government to establish faith for citizens?
Absolutely.
It's not the role of government to establish faith for citizens. Our Constitution forbids it, right? But beyond that, fundamentally, the government cannot dictate that to us. Some people would argue that maybe elements of government is trying to do that right now. Do you want to talk at all about that, or should we go on to the next topic?
I think we would agree that government can, institute it, but at the same time, they're not supposed to infringe on it either or limit it in any way, which we have seen, like, for example, during this COVID pandemic, they've tried to limit the ability of churches to meet and things like that, and that's getting into the realm of infringing on religious freedom.
And we have two clauses that address that. The Establishment Clause says that no government, and especially in schools, can endorse a certain religion, and then, of course, you have the Free Exercise Clause that says we can worship freely, and so I think that both of those are covered.
Okay. Great. So the U.S. Constitution guarantees, you're kind of hitting on that, but this is some of the stuff that's come in. The U.S. Constitution guarantees religious freedom in this country. Now, the beautiful thing of that, it doesn't necessarily make a monopoly. Liberty creates diversity. And so I don't care, people come to this country from all over the world, and they often bring their religions with them.
Right.
And they are free to express their religious views and practices in this country. Our Constitution guarantees that. Now, let's talk about that just a bit. While tenets of faith vary among religions and even groups within a particular religion, is there some general moral consensus among faith groups?
Yes. The five major religions, right? Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, and Hinduism.
Yep.
All of them would agree that morality is important, that our faith isn't something we do, it's who we are. And you can't check that in at the door of any institution, including our public schools. And all of them even have this commonality, this moral thread throughout all of them. And in fact, I would say all of them recognize Abraham and Jesus. All of them recognize Jesus as a good prophet, as somebody that was enlightened or a good teacher, or the Son of God. But all five major religions, which comprise 90+% of our population, agree that yes, absolutely, faith is crucial, it's vital, and they all have a common theme, that moral compass.
And if we take the 10 Commandments, which of course come out of Judaism and is also embraced by Christianity, those basic commandments, which were the foundation for law in this country.
Even the Hammurabi Code.
Exactly.
I mean, they all.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is the various religions really embrace
Yes.
those concepts. They may say it in a little different
Yes,
way,
agreed.
but they embrace those big moral concepts. Are we in agreement there?
Absolutely.
Okay. And so if there are viewers and if you've got different opinions, feel free to communicate those to us because this is a panel. We're having discussion here. All right, so what influences are driving the anti-faith and challenging the long-held moral standards in this country today?
I start off and say I think a lot of it is just individualism. I think it's what makes me feel good, what makes me happy, what do I want to do? And if that doesn't go along with what is biblical, then I'm not going to stand for the Bible because I don't want to live by those rules. That's not what I want to do. And I think that we have watched that, I know in my lifetime, and I'm almost 41 years old, if you look at TV now and you look at TV when I was a child, there's a huge difference.
Yeah.
I can't just let my kids turn the television on and think that they're not going to see certain things that would not be acceptable, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think because people are more self-centered, then they will go with whatever feels good at the time.
That's good.
Is that a religion?
Yes.
Self-serving, yes. Worshiping yourself. I mean, essentially.
Well, it's a belief system, right? It's okay, so we're really getting out in the weeds here, but I think that's an important question, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about a faith system. What do I choose to believe? So if I deny I'm not going to believe something, I am going to believe something because it always gets replaced with what I choose to believe. And sometimes it's self-determination. That's not a formal religion, but secular humanism or whatever. I mean,
Yeah. I think some people also really react against Christianity because it brings conviction, too. I mean, they'll read something in the Bible that really hits home to them. And, in World War II, they used to say you get the most flack when you're hitting the target. And so I think that's true sometimes with Christianity. They'll know that certain scriptures say certain things, and it's very offensive to them. But it's because it brings conviction.
okay.
And I'll touch on that as being in law enforcement and 20 years of it, people a lot of times do not want to own responsibility for their actions. They'll justify their actions because of someone else's actions or some circumstance that put them in this situation. So if you were to get, like he was saying, biblical about it, they're not going to like that because it will hold a conviction to them.
Yeah, I think that started way back in the Bible when somebody said, it's like, he may need to. Yeah, that's the human condition, isn't it? We're all a little bit that way, I think. All right, let's jump into kind of those other bigger questions now. And let's focus a little more on faith and morality and education very specifically. So, whose primary responsibility is it to determine what children learn about faith and morality and that broader concept of character development?
As Arnold Horshack would say, ooh, ooh, ooh. Welcome back, Cotter reference. Absolutely, definitively, in my opinion, it is the parents, the guardians of those children, and that's protected in Virginia Code. Virginia Code 1-240.1, to paraphrase, a parent has a fundamental right to make decisions concerning the upbringing, the care, and the education of their children.
Yeah.
It is absolutely our job as parents. We are the greatest, always have been, the greatest stakeholders in a child's education, and certainly with biblical worldviews. And I bring it up again, but in 1642 and 1647, the first two laws dealing with education in Massachusetts had to do with the parent's responsibility as the primary stakeholder. That has not changed. It's even still protected under Virginia Code today.
Yeah. Okay, are we in total agreement there? Anybody want to add anything?
Well, I'll just say in Deuteronomy 11, it directs that parents are supposed to teach these things to your children.
Yeah.
And Jews and Christians would agree with that. And the Jewish kids I grew up with, sometimes they would even wear a tefillin. They would literally wear the scripture on their body, on their forehead or their arm.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just trying to practice their beliefs like that. And so certainly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So now let's dig into some little meatier things. Should schools and the government play a role? So that's kind of a big question. Let's break that down just a little bit. First of all, a question comes in, not sure if that was Facebook or some other source, but here's the question: should schools be teaching about religions at all? So we kind of talked about that, but dig into it some more.
Well, I'll just shortly comment. I find it hard to teach history without bringing up religion because it has been a part of our society from the beginning.
Yes.
Well, this is a non-issue. Virginia standards of learning require and mandate religion being taught.
Yeah.
So yes.
So I think the distinction here, and for clarification, and a lot of times people don't know how they don't know all the stuff, and I'm not trying to say that in a belittling sense, but it can be overwhelming and confusing, and you hear so many things, and who knows what's on Facebook or whatever where people get their news, and just because it's out there doesn't mean it's true, right? But here is, I think, the real issue. Teaching about religions and teaching all of the core tenets from a discipleship concept for a religion as an advocate, as a zealot for a religion, two totally separate things. So to understand a religion, understanding its history somewhat, understanding, some of those core teachings because if you don't teach those, people don't understand how we think, how people who have that faith system think or behave. And so that's an essential part of instruction to help inform the whole. Now, so I think what I'm hearing is that it's not only law, but it's essential to give guidance on religions so that people are informed. In our public schools, they're not allowed to be specifically discipling people without the consent of the parent, without, in other words, that's not part of the curriculum. Right?
Absolutely, and I think you hit the wall right on the head with that one key word, about. You can teach about religion, and honestly, and this might be shocking, but even as a pastor, I don't want our teachers and educators having that role and responsibility in their lap to teach my children or our students Christianity or Islam, but I do expect them to be teaching about those things, and again, even with teaching Darwin, let's teach creationism beside it. Let's have all the information out there, and I think that goes all the way back to Plato and Greek philosophy. Let's put it all out there and let our children be able to cognitively use their own reasoning and come up with their own determination, and that's protected. Teachers are even allowed to share their personal views if it's asked of them.
Correct.
And when it comes to students, they're encouraged by law and protected, even by some cases recently from the ACLU, believe it or not. They can share their faith. They can distribute literature. They can have prayer meetings, even during school times, cafeterias and recess. And I just think we have focused so much on separation of church and state that so many people have bought into the lie that faith has to be checked into the door of the halls of education, when in fact that could not be further from the truth.
Okay.
Well, obviously, education and evangelism are two different things.
Yes.
And we understand that, and that's what we're saying here. But people need to understand that you can't understand the history of America unless you understand religion, because that motivated the founders of the country in a huge way.
Yeah.
So if you cut out all religion when you talk about our history as a nation, you're just not going to get it.
Religion is what brought us over here to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right, here's another question, comes off of social media, Facebook. Robert sends in, which good values should be taught? And Brent, I'm getting in my ear that when you speak, hold your mic closer because they're not picking it up on the, okay? So which good values should be taught?
Well, I think respect in our legal system is a pretty safe way to educate our children on expectations of behavior, which goes along with our society as well.
Mm-hmm.
There are a number of organizations that have worked on this already, like Character Counts and other groups, and they have a list of character traits that they try to build into students, such as respect, honesty,
Right.
Things like that. So, and all of that plays out in education with things like plagiarism or cheating and things like that.
Right.
And this isn't new. Piaget and Bandura and others have focused on this and tried to figure this out without religion being the driving force. I mean, this is nothing new. Character Counts is the best example.
Yeah, and yet at the same time, all of these concepts where community leaders, parents, etc., have come together and say, what are some of those core qualities that our kids need to know? Like you brought out, Brent, like you did, the validity of those things is because it represents the community, the families, the society as a whole as, look, this is the kind of community we want to have, and if you're going to be a part of this community, we want you to have some of these common values and understanding and behavior that goes along with it. That's ultimately what character is about. Character is that behavior that is lived out. It's kind of following that compass.
I think there's a fear of the imposition of values, but I think we need to also have a fear of the opposite of that as well. Because, like I said earlier, there's consequences to every belief system. On October 13th, we saw an example of this up in Philadelphia when that woman was raped on the train, and she had all these people observing the rape who did nothing. And I suggest to you that's a demonstration of character of those people.
Yeah.
And so I would think that chivalry, for example, is a character trait that we would want to build into people, and that might have prevented that rape from occurring.
Absolutely.
Great. I'm going to have to keep moving along here because the clock is. All right. Can a public school truly be, quote, neutral? Everyone has a faith of some sort. Even those who aren't religious believe in their own power to determine their futures, or the power of the universe, or some sort of a belief system. This was a question that came in to us. So I think we pretty well already covered that, didn't we?
Yeah, we agree that neutrality is really a fallacy, that everyone has some type of belief system.
Yes.
And what we're seeing in America today is they would consider it secularism, but when you look at surveys that are done on the attitudes of youth coming out of schools today, they're more and more positive towards socialism. And when you consider a quote by Vladimir Lenin, he said, "Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted." And I think we're seeing that in the youth of today.
Yeah.
They think socialism is great. And I say, if you think it's great, take a trip to Venezuela.
Yeah. I could talk a long time about that because I've been in a lot of those countries, but I will refrain.
Yeah.
Did you want to add something?
I was just
Brent?
going to agree with his statement. I think a lot of our problems today is our core beliefs as Americans is starting to kind of change off, as you see, like you're talking about socialism versus capitalism. And those are things that growing up I didn't experience, but now I'm looking and watching and I'm like, I don't know where this has come from.
Well, I think some of us know where it's come from, and that was a question I brought up earlier and nobody bid on it. But, it really, a lot of it's agenda driven by political entities that really are, and I'm just going to be bold here, that are trying to uproot the structure and civilization that we have here. And they have been working at it for a very long time, starting in higher ed, and then it's gradually worked all the way down until now it's down to our kindergartens. But anyway, I'll throw that in for free. Here's another question that comes in from I don't know, some source, maybe Facebook. Should there be Bible reading and prayer in our schools?
Well, there is. I mean, let's not focus so much on the negative and what isn't. There absolutely is, and it's protected by Virginia law and legislation, even federally, that we do have Bible classes after school on school grounds. We can have baccalaureate service, religious services on school. I mean, we're protected legally by that. There are clauses established for that. And prayer, I mean, the late Jerry Falwell used to say, as long as there are tests, there will always be prayer in school. And Virginia requires a 1-minute moment of silence that we can pray, students can pray. And so those things are there. People talk all the time that God has been kicked out of the schools. If you believe in God, and you believe that he is superior as the Bible says he is, you can't kick God out of anywhere. And so I think, fundamentally it's protected and it's happening practically. There are all of my kids went to public schools. All 3 of my kids toward the end of their career went to middle and high school and public schools. And all 3 of them at the high school level after school went to Bible classes in regular classrooms, and that's where they were taught. If you have it was an organization, and that's protected. So those things are being done.
So I think maybe the question kind of goes back to, so for example, 20, 30 years ago, well, maybe 60. More than that. It's been a while, yeah. 60, it used to be every morning, you had a pledge allegiance to the flag, which how many schools do that anymore? Right. Okay. There was a prayer, and then there was announcements, and then you started the day. That doesn't happen in most, certainly public schools. Now, many private and faith-based schools do that. And I think maybe the question is really driving to that, where because of the diversity of religion and so forth, rather than saying, okay, so, if my teacher's a Muslim, for my kid, and if I don't want my kid being prayed by a Muslim or whatever, or a Muslim doesn't want a Christian praying over their kid or whatever. And that's kind of where we are in our society. But the reality is it is true that prayer and these kind of events can happen. They can be initiated, particularly by students, and even at times by the teachers and the staff and so forth. Yeah. Okay, so let's go quickly. In the case of children who spend the vast majority of their time and most of their relationships at school, what support should character formation get at school? And so that's kind of the big question. And I've got 3 questions I'm going to throw in right underneath that. I'll just put them together so we can move through it a little quicker. Should schools support parents' values and community standards of behavior? What should that look like in the culture of the classroom, the campus, and in instruction? And what can families do to make sure that their schools aren't contradicting what they're teaching their kids at home? So that's a bunch that I've thrown in there. We're talking generally about the role of schools, public, private, all schools, okay? Let's just bring it all together. What's their role? What's their responsibility to help support and develop good character development in our students? And then how does that, tying that to what they're getting at home, and how should it look like in the classroom and the campus culture, and and if it's not, what can parents do about it? You spent time working in schools, Brent, security and other issues. You weren't necessarily in the classroom teaching these things, but do you have any concepts there or observations? What should be done?
Well, I think it goes back to what you were talking about earlier. Every belief system has certain things that are similar or the same in terms of respect, not murdering someone, things like that. Our basic core beliefs are pretty much all the same when it comes to the level of behavior that we expect from one another. So I think ensuring that we're creating an environment that's conducive to learning, that's nurturing, safe, and respectful for all.
Okay. So how does that get carried out in the school, in the classroom, because, what's that look like? How are the teachers, how are the administrators supposed to do that? And, there are ideas that some of us may have, and then there may be mandates and other things that are very restrictive. So let's be honest and let's be real here about what we're dealing with.
I'll say, I'll stir the pot here maybe. I know that we need good character in our society because good character in people benefits all of us.
Yeah.
And good character is the basis of all relationships, because if you have good character, you're going to be trustworthy. And trust is the basis of any relationship, whether it's marriage, friendship, businesses, anything.
Yeah.
So you have to have that character to have that trustworthiness. But I don't totally know that I trust the public schools to teach the character. Like, there's part of me that goes, well, maybe they should just focus on math, reading, and things like that, because I've just seen them bring in things that are quote-unquote character education, and all it is a bunch of woke, politically correct nonsense that is offensive to many parents. And so I've got a lot of mixed feelings on the implementation of it.
I agree, actually. I agree. I think that as a society for the past 50, 60 years, we want to put the responsibility that's in our lap on someone else. And we find this in our public schools today more than ever. Our kids can be this way, act this way, do these things. We send them to school. We want the teachers to fix them and change them and make them better citizens, when that is our role and our responsibility fundamentally. And so I actually agree with you. I think that's our role as the greatest stakeholder in a student's life, to teach that worldview, to teach the rights and the wrongs, and leave the education to those 3 R's, right? Reading, writing, arithmetic.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we don't teach character or values, but I think your question for me resonated more with reinforcing.
Yes.
Reinforcing.
Supporting.
Supporting.
Yes.
I'm going to stir the pot here. But again, going back on the Virginia Code, that a parent has that fundamental role and responsibility to have that input concerning their upbringing and education and care. I find it frustrating and it angers me. Who our decision makers, our legislators, our educators are listening to, putting their ear toward, and investing resources in, and who they're not listening to. 0.5% of our demographic identifies as transgender. 0.5%. You turn on the TV, you go to Congress, you look at some of the decision maker meetings, it just seems like it's all over. You can't watch news without finding something that's tied to public school with legislation or even logistics, adding and changing, because we have listened to that 5% group saying, we want this, we want that, what about us? And I agree with Brent. Every religion would say, we need to accept everybody, love everybody, give everybody a chance. Of course. My point is this. We listen to 0.5% of the demographic and make swift, major changes. We're changing everything in a lot of different areas. And yet 90% of Americans believe in God. 70% of Americans say religion is fundamentally important. 65% of Americans affiliate with a local church. That's a much bigger group, and yet that's the one that nobody wants to listen to, and we say stop. It was separation of church and state. If the role of education is to support, according to Virginia code, to recognize that parents are the greatest stakeholders, then they need to have a seat at the table of their child's education, of the decisions that are being made, and supporting all of them, not just small segments of them, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It does make sense. So anybody want to tie a bow on that?
Well, we're seeing that that's the way it should be, and maybe that's the law, but that's not the way it's playing out. And so you're seeing a lot of parents feeling disrespected right now by the public school system, and you're literally seeing millions of kids leaving public schools,
yes,
going to either homeschooling or private schools or things like that, and it's because the parents don't feel heard. And all the school board meeting things you hear about in the news, not just Loudoun County, but across the country, is parents feeling ignored and disrespected. And they're voting with their feet, but they shouldn't have to vote with their feet. That their rights should be respected.
Exactly. And so really that's what I think what we're trying to say is the schools have a responsibility to support the parents and the community and the law around those things that give and help develop character. Unfortunately, what I think we're seeing so often, and I mean, you've been in the school system, all of us have been in the schools, and the absolute anarchy that is going on in so many of our schools. It's like there's cliches I want to use, but I better not. Okay, you understand where I'm going with that. It's like, okay, the kids are running the place. The teachers have too often, I mean, they have very little real control, because of mandates and because of threats of lawsuits or fear of lawsuits, all kind of things, where they are the people who are actually employed by the community to not only educate our kids, but also to help reinforce good behavior that these kids definitely need to learn. Character is developed in community, at home, and the other place where they spend the vast majority of their time is school. And if you try to develop character at home, but it's absolutely neglected at school, and you're doing your doctoral work on the whole concept of bullying, I mean, that's just one of many issues. But when that kind of stuff is rampant and out of control, and the people who are supposed to be running the schools have no control and no, they just, hide, cowering in the corner, proverbially speaking.
It takes a village.
Maybe. So, okay. So what I'm trying to say here is it's time for our schools to get back into the business of being responsible adults and the people who are doing their jobs. And there are people who are doing their best. But you said it earlier, I think you did, Tom, so many things are coming down from other entities, whether it's federal, whether it's state, whether it's superintendents or school boards or whatever, that have everything flipped upside down, and what was right is now wrong, and what was wrong is now right, and it's just chaos. That is bringing about the destruction not only of our society, but our schools. We see failing schools everywhere. How can a kid learn in an environment like that? How can a person teach effectively in an environment like that? I'm very passionate about these things because I think this is really where the rubber hits the road, and parents need to know this. I think they are learning this, and what parents need to do is step up, and those educators who are with the parents need to step onto the side of the parents and say, enough is enough. We're going to take back our schools, and we are going to educate these kids the way they need to be educated.
And when you have educators and parents as those two stakeholders involved in a student's life that are not on the same page, it's a dysfunctional relationship reminiscent of a divorce in a family.
Yeah. But if they'll come together,
gold.
Amazing things happen. And a lot of times, because of a lack of relationship, lack of, just knowing each other, it starts there. But parents need to really try to connect with their school teacher, their teachers, and build that relationship. But then the teachers need to make sure they are supporting and reinforcing the role of the parent, the responsibility of the parent, and the guidance of the parent. Now, we also know, unfortunately, that there are parents out there in our society who are AWOL. Okay? And so when their little Johnny does something, then, you try to shape little Johnny, and the parent shows up, and Katie barred the door.
Yep.
Talk to us, Brent. I see the wheels turning.
Well, I feel like we've created a division in our society, and we can see it. Like you were talking about earlier, Portland and some of the other areas with the racism and, the sexual orientation and preferences and things like that. Our society is divided, and I have to ask myself all the time, why are we not identifying as Americans? Why are we trying to break off into all these little divisions everywhere instead of working together towards a common goal of educating our children and trying to ensure they have a great future? We're more concerned about some of the things like you were talking about with the woke mentality. Mm-hmm. And to me, this whole woke mentality is creating division. It's breaking people off into sectors. It's causing people to pick sides. And it's just not conducive to learning at all. And to me, some of that, being CRT, would create a group of oppressors and a group of the oppressed. And I just totally disagree with that.
Well, we're so divided, like you said, and we don't focus on things that unite us, like being Americans, because we as a society have made an idol of diversity. Everyone is so concerned with being different and all this, and radical individualism, like you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. So with radical individualism, they tell a child that you can decide if you want to be a boy or a girl when you're in kindergarten, but we won't let them drink or vote till they're 18 and 21. They're making decisions like that are much more consequential. Yeah. And so it is this radical individualism, and what we're getting is Lord of the Flies, because you have children that make all these decisions, and it's chaos.
Yeah. All right, we're quickly running out of time, so I'm going to jump in here. This question, I think, is pertinent for tonight, and then we're going to move into kind of a wrap-up round. Some parents choose to teach their children themselves. Some put their children in schools that focus on faith as central to their instructional model. Are these viable models of education?
I think we have to define viable. Viable as great outcomes available for each one? Absolutely. Viable as doable for parents? No. There are a lot of parents in this country, especially through this pandemic, that are strapped, they are tight financially, fiscally. It is not an option for them. It's easy to just say, especially from one group, looking at people of faith, saying, well, if you want that, then go to private school or homeschool. Well, they can't afford that. That's not an option. Money is already going to the public school system for that student. They can't afford to stop work or take extra money and fund a private education. So I think outcome-wise, absolutely. And again, all of our kids went through homeschool and private school and public school. But to just throw that out flippantly and say, just do homeschool or private school if that's what you want, that's not an option unless you start changing some things and giving parents a choice with that money. Then maybe it becomes a viable option.
So let me ask you a question just to clarify. What I think I'm hearing you say is outcomes-wise, it is a viable option because a student can get a viable education in these formats.
Yes.
Okay? Viable from the standpoint of, look, if you don't want what we're giving you, go take care of yourself. That's not viable, because ultimately it should be the parent's choice always how and when and where their child gets educated.
Yes.
So, in other words, look, I know parents who literally had their kids expelled from school in the last year over various issues of present controversy, okay? Not because the parents said okay, it's just because the system said, we don't want you here. That's not okay. That's not viable, because that parent has every right, according to law, to have their child educated, and they're a citizen there, and they should have their child educated there. Now, granted, a child can be expelled for behavioral things and so forth, but that there are qualifications, obviously. Anybody else want to weigh in quickly on that question?
If we had vouchers, it would solve a lot of things.
There we go.
But obviously there's groups that are against that because it would threaten their power.
Yeah, that's it, always. So, here's the philosophy that I have. The money should follow the child. Mm-hmm. Now, that would require state laws and all that stuff to change. Mm-hmm. But if we really want to have, the modern language is equity, okay? You want to have equity in education? Mm-hmm. Let the money follow the child, and it doesn't matter what race, religion, or anything else. Yep. We're going to get equity. Solves the problem.
Absolutely.
And improves education, because all of a sudden we have competition, and that competition drives down cost and increases quality every time in every industry.
Yep.
Now let me just say, there is a segment in the public school system. I mean, my wife is an administrator in the public school system. The majority of teachers, and I think you brought this out, it's not coming at ground level, at ground zero here. The majority of teachers and educators and administrators we have are phenomenal people that love kids, investing in students' lives, and they want the absolute best for those students.
Sure.
I think this issue is deeper than that.
Yes.
No question. Well said. All right. Technically, we're late, but you know what? We're having a great time, and if our followers will follow us, we're going to take just a couple more minutes.
It's just long-winded.
And let's go for a wrap-up session here, a wrap-up round, okay? I'd like each of you to address our final question through your own areas of experience as a pastor, as law enforcement, and as a counselor, focusing on what you have witnessed in your career and what knowledge you have from your professional perspective. Just talk to our audience about this question. Here's the question. What impact does faith and morality have in the individual and on society, both in the short term and in the long term? Let's start with you, Pastor.
All right, so, short-term wise, if you look at our children, our students, in church, in community, in school, the short-term implication and ramifications of not having faith and morality as crucial, as a priority. You have, and this is something that, as you brought out, I'm addressing things like bullying and hazing, and you have this disconnect of kids just doing whatever they want to do, whatever feels good, what's best for them, with no regard to other students, other people, respect for authority, all of those things. We just see this downward track. The long term is, and I had that to talk about as well, but you have a rape in Pennsylvania on a train, and you have 30 plus witnesses filming this. That's what happens when students don't have faith and morality taught to them. You have this issue. And in schools, yes, my dissertation is on peer intervention during bullying incidents in schools, because this is happening much earlier than adults on a train.
Yeah.
You're having, in fact, research shows that 57% of a bullying incident would stop within 10 seconds if someone would just speak up and say stop. And so the research I'm doing shows wonderful short-term and long-term results when you incorporate these teaching to the whole child. When you start using it through a filter, the theoretical framework with Bandura and Piaget, when you start teaching, when empathy is starting to grow, middle school is a phenomenal group.
Right.
And you start to inject these things, you start to have cultures develop, not just individually, but collectively, cultures develop that put others first and respect others and want to make a difference in the lives of others, and they're speaking out and things are changing for good. I think that's what's missing. I think that's the element that's missing. We're not teaching those things anymore, or if we are, that there's not a holistic and a unified effort. And so you have bullying, and you have train incidents, and you have stabbings happening. It's not just rape, it's stabbing, it's all these things, just this disconnect. I think we need to teach the faith and morality so that there can be a connect, that we are brothers and sisters. We are a community. We're not individuals. No man is an island. And the short-term and the long-term consequences or benefit are absolutely tethered and tied to whether we are teaching faith and morality and incorporating them, and how we're navigating in the halls of education those issues.
Thank you.
I would definitely touch on what he just said. Without faith and morality, it's all about individualism. And if you do not teach an individual at a young age, the world will teach them, and it's not going to be good for our society. Again, with some of the things we're seeing in Portland and other areas, these are young people. You're not looking at people who are, 40, 50 years old out there. From what I've seen on the news, it's 18, 19, 20-year-old, young people. So it's very important to teach morality and faith, because if we don't, we're not going to know what our way of life is today 10 years from now, because things that were not acceptable 10 years ago, obviously again today is acceptable. Well, how far is it going to go? Without faith and morality, there's no standard. I mean, obviously we hold a biblical standard. So for me as an individual, I know when put in a stressful situation, sometimes my mind thinks something that, well, now I know that's not right. So I'm not going to act in that fashion. I'm not going to treat somebody nasty because they're treating me nasty. I'm going to treat them how I want to be treated. And I don't want to be a bad representation of a Christian, of a brother Christian. I don't want to be that. So I think whether it be Christianity or anything else, you have to have faith and morality, or we're just going to keep sliding downhill. And I don't think that we're going to have a society if it keeps going in that direction.
Yeah, and from the standpoint of law enforcement, I mean, consequences of criminality and all kinds of things from a negative and from a positive. Can you give us any kind of, talk to us about that negative and positive behavioral patterns that form out of these concepts?
Well, sure. Even if you look at it from a standpoint of not being legal so much as, like we've talked about a lot of the time, like consequences. There's consequences to actions. And let's use drug use, for example. Well, if you look at, booking photos when somebody is incarcerated the first time for having a hard drug, say like heroin or meth, and then you look progressively as time goes on, look at their health, look what it's doing to them, look what it's doing to their family. And I mean, that could even be brought all the way down to alcoholism, driving impaired, any of these things. There's consequences to actions. There's a reason why we have our set rules. And they have been, well, like you mentioned earlier, since Adam and Eve, there is a set rules. And if you look at the 10 Commandments, getting at that, there's a reason there's 10 Commandments. We can sit here and talk about every commandment and give you the negative consequences if you don't follow those. And I think that's important for you to have that knowledge in the back of your head, that this is not rules that were just made up. This is rules because we want to live a productive, happy life, even if you were to take religion out of it. And you have to have some sort of moral basis.
Yes.
And for me, that's the Bible. For someone else, I'm not sure. I can't speak for them. But where are they drawing their beliefs from? Where are they drawing their principles from? Because it can be from a wide spectrum, and that may not be beneficial to our society at all.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Well, when I think about the impact of faith and morality on society, the first thing I think of is Psalm 33:12. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. And I'll say this, when I think about all the different problems we have in society today, it's Christians that I see starting hospitals, orphanages, helping the refugees that are coming here from Afghanistan and other places around the world. It's Christians I see who are helping sex trafficking victims. And this is what my friends are doing. I see it every day. And it's the faith that motivates them. And in regards to mental health issues, I'll say as a mental health professional that it's people of faith, or Christians that I'm most familiar with, they cope better with difficulty. They're more resilient when the hard times come. So there's huge benefits to faith, both on society as well as individually.
Amen.
Wow. We've unpacked a lot tonight. Thank you to each of you for joining our panel, for sharing your time and your expertise with us. It's been fun, and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. To our audience, just let me say thank you for joining us as well. I hope that you've been challenged and encouraged, and maybe if you've been made mad, we're sorry about that. But think about those things we've talked about. Feel free to give us feedback. We welcome your feedback, and we will communicate with you. I would also say, if you'd like to learn more about Noah Webster Educational Foundation, you can check out our website, nwef.org. And I also encourage you, if you want to know about events coming up and other things going on, news updates and so forth, you can sign up for those there as well. And so again, thank you for spending this evening with us, and just pray that you have a great evening, and God bless. Thank you so much. Have a good night.